for our weekly chairman's update. A lot going on in the state. Just today, completed the so-called committee days down in Olympia. And committee days are a kind of dress rehearsal ahead of a regular legislative session in Olympia every year. The legislative sessions start after the new year in January, and the committee days kind of warm up, tune up hearings are done in mid December. So just finished today, literally this morning, the last committee hearings were done. And we have an idea from committee days what the Democrat majority in Olympia is going to be prioritizing and making the big issues in the upcoming legislative session in Olympia starting next month in January. And so from that, we have an idea of what their approach to changes in the law and changes in state budgets are going to be in affecting us here in Washington State. I want to talk for a few minutes about basically what we've seen and what we expect to happen in the months ahead at the state capitol in Olympia. For sure, we are going to see bills from the progressive majority that want to change housing policy in our state, change the way that zoning and permitting for building apartment buildings or homes works. Now, this could be a good thing because we do need zoning reform, and particularly, most of all, we need permitting reform here in Washington. It takes too long and costs too much to get a permit to build just about anything. Single family house, small apartment building, big apartment building. But that's not the direction that the progressives in Olympia want to go. They don't want to simplify the permitting process. They want to direct it. They want to customize it so that it is easier for certain kinds of building to get done, but not for all building to get done. This is ultimately a mistake, in my opinion. We ought to just reduce the regulatory and permitting building on every kind of building and just build more of everything. What the progressive majority in Olympia wants to do is focus building on what they call transit-oriented development. That is, building housing close to bus lines and particularly light rail lines. It's part of a larger priority they have of getting people out of their cars and more dependent on mass transit. Again, I believe that's essentially a fancy way of picking winners when it comes to real estate development, and the state ought to take a more neutral position and just make it easier for everybody. That's one policy point that the progressives are going to make a priority of. The other is, of course, gun control. They want to restrict firearm ownership among legal, law-abiding citizens in Washington. They have a number of proposals. Some are new taxes on buying guns or ammunition. Some are new permits that would be required to buy or sell a firearm or ammunition. And in general, it's just more restrictions on people, regular people, owning firearms to protect themselves and their families and their homes. At a time when property crimes are skyrocketing. And I just spoke earlier today down at the Capitol with some representatives of the insurance industry, particularly the property and casualty insurance industry, so think car insurance and homeowners insurance. And crime rates, both for vehicles and for people's residences, are rising so fast in Washington that many insurance companies are just, they don't know what to do. They're going to leave Washington. They're going to stop writing insurance policies here in Washington State for a number of reasons, but mostly because claims related to crimes are rising so fast. So we need to focus on solving crime rather than taking firearms away from law-abiding people. Again, The anti-gun rights movement in the progressive left in Olympia is ideologically driven. It is not practical minded. It's not designed to make people safer. In fact, with all their recent anti-gun rights bills that have passed in Olympia, the homicide rate has gone up in this state. Criminal shootings are more common than ever, not less. So their ideological agenda doesn't work. In fact, it has the opposite effect. So the conservatives in Olympia will be fighting to protect your rights on those two fronts, on housing and regulatory permit policies, and on gun rights issues. But the real focus of the upcoming legislative session in Olympia is going to be taxes. The progressives in Olympia want to raise taxes. They want to raise property taxes, which is a ridiculous proposition. Property taxes have been going way up in recent years, and people who own homes, own property, are getting priced out, being forced to sell because they can't afford the taxes. And the progressive left's response so far is they want to make it even faster that property taxes go up, increase the rate at which property taxes can be raised every year. It's a terrible idea. They also want to expand the state's capital gains excise tax, so-called. Most people consider capital gains a form of income tax. Here in Washington, we call it an excise tax. This capital gains excise tax was passed into law a few years ago. In its current form, it is somewhat limited in who has to pay it, but the progressive left's plan is to put those limits away, expand the capital gains excise tax so that virtually everyone pays it. This will affect people who count on retirement monies to live on, pension money. It'll affect people who want to sell their homes, maybe to fund their retirement. It'll affect people who have a little bit of money in stock options from a job. It's part of their pay. It will affect nearly everyone, and that, in my opinion, is the point. The progressive left is going to use this capital gains excise tax as an excuse to create what is, in fact, a state income tax here in Washington. Now, we passed into law recently an initiative that I was part of that bans a state income tax. The trick that the progressive left is going to use to get around that restriction, that ban, is to call what is really an income tax an excise tax. That's a word game. Their plans are effectively to create a state income tax. The progressive left is going to raise your taxes. They already have this exaggerated, phony talk of a huge budget deficit. It's a projection looking a number of years out into the future. There's no current budget deficit in Olympia, but they're creating this sense of panic and crisis around a projected budget deficit as an excuse to raise your taxes. The Republicans in Olympia and common sense conservatives all around the state are going to push back on these tax increases. We're already taxed enough in Washington state. All of our priorities at the state capitol in Olympia will reflect the four core priorities of Republicans in Washington and conservatives in Washington. And as I've said before, those priorities are fight crime, lower crime in your neighborhoods. Make sure that tax policy is rational and really focused on efficiently delivering government services, not constantly increasing government spending. Reliable and trustworthy elections, that remains one of our priorities, and you will see bills that we file to do that in Olympia. And lastly, improve the performance of our K-12 public schools. Get it away from politics and indoctrination and move our K-12 schools back to a focus on core learning and basic education, reading, writing, math, and the hard sciences. Those are our priorities, and they will be our bulwark, our beachhead against the growing government, and growing taxes and growing crime rates that progressive politics have inflicted on the people of Washington. It's a good fight. It's the fight that all of us involved in Republican politics in Washington are engaged in, and we will continue to keep you updated into the new year and through the legislative session on specific things that you can do on the phone, on the computer, in person, to make sure we keep a grasping and greedy and overgrown government sector in good shape, in good discipline, and well focused on delivering really good services to you. That's what good government is, and that's what Republicans support. That's it for this week. I'll talk to you again next week. Until then, be well and stay strong.